if you had your druthers and you could find the intersection between what you're passionate about, what you're good enough at that you could teach other people, and that you can monetize. And that intersection is the gold, right?
Mhm.
And most people spend no time even not even aware that intersection is out there, and certainly not willing to take the risk of pursuing such a bold endeavor. Welcome to the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. I'm Mark Aylward.
I'm Jim Gurley. Thanks for being here.
This podcast is a space for men to have real, raw, and often difficult conversations to help guide middle-aged men through making hard decisions in life. Both Jim and I are mentors focused on leading consciously. Tune in every week to have honest and often humorous discussions on well-being, personal growth, and professional development.
Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward and I'm here with my colleague Jim Gurley. And today we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to both of us, and that is careers. We're going to talk all about careers. And Jim, as you know, I spent my entire career helping people make career decisions as a headhunter and the owner of a couple of different staffing firms. So that I built them and sold them. So have that kind of entrepreneurial experience as well. But yeah, talking to people my entire life about how to make big decisions involving their professional future, their professional journey. So the people that might get a kick out of this, pretty much everybody, but anybody specifically who is contemplating a career change. And that's kind of the person we're talking about today. And Jim also has had a very interesting career, done a lot of different things. And maybe Jim, you can share a little bit about that with the listeners now.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Mark. But first of all, yeah, you're a domain expert in this subject today, so we're fortunate to have your insight, and yeah, we're looking forward to get into this. But I do have a question though, since we're pretty specific about the market that we're serving with this podcast, or the guys we're talking about, right? What is typical? What do you see when somebody calls you? And what is your mix of clientele too, as of today? What are some of the pain points? What are some of the frustrations that you see, particularly men in this case, at this stage in their careers, at this stage in their life? What's the most common? And then we'll go from there, and I'll even get into my situation in relationship to this topic when you and I have had these discussions.
Well, I think the vast majority of people that I talk to aren't doing what they really want to be doing. They're doing something, the path was set for them at an early age by maybe a parent or a guidance counselor or an uncle, maybe the family business. Dad's a doctor, wanted me to be a doctor. Dad's a lawyer, wanted me to be a lawyer. That kind of thing is very prevalent. And so in middle age, I talk to a lot of people that just want to do something different. They want to change. And typically the change they're looking for is to be of service in some capacity, to do something that has more meaning, I guess. The second group of people, they have been dealt a hand that they had no control over, particularly during this COVID stuff, people losing their jobs just because of downsizing and the economy and stuff like that. And many of these people in middle age, the dudes that I talk to, they haven't looked for work in 20 years, 25 years. So they just don't know how, because the way to look for work today is very different than it was 20, 25 years ago. It's like flipped upside down. And we can talk about that a little bit too.
Well, yeah, well, let's get right into that. Men in general, their self-worth is based on their net worth or their worth to a particular career or industry. It's common, right? That's just how we value ourselves. And often that's related to income level or accumulation of wealth of some kind. But how does that fit into relevancy and job market opportunities for men? And do you see guys get aged out at this stage because either they're making too much money, and if it's a large corporation looking for a way to trim, and often it'll be that. And then even let's just throw some stuff out that most people won't come out and talk about. And that is, how about being a white man in his 40s or 50s looking for a job? Do you believe there are some biases and possibly some conditions that really are at their disadvantage just because of when they happen to um, be born and the color of their skin.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are biases everywhere from all different directions. You know, in my seat, from my vantage point as a recruiter and the owner of a recruiting firm with recruiters and salespeople underneath me, we're interfacing with large and small companies as to how they hire people. And the hiring process has been broken for a long time. Very, very few companies hire people properly, hire people well, and very few don't waste a lot of time. Right. So that's one thing. But as far as ageism is concerned and being a white male, you know, there's nothing concrete. People that share this bias don't make it public. You know, it's they keep it private. It's in their minds, it's in their culture sometimes, but it's not overt for a reason, because it's against the law. So, you
Well,
know,
that seems like one law that doesn't is not as enforced. And I don't say this as a victim. There's nothing more unattractive than the victim position. So I throw that out there just to talk about it, because as you said, Mark, there's always biases. There's always some form of prejudice. That's just human beings. That's who we are. So
well,
this is not a bashing, feel sorry for ourselves topic by any means, but I think it's a real thing that we have to at least be aware of, um, as far as even how it looks. Like, are they really hiring for the qualifications, or are they hiring to meet a quota, or to look a certain way in an effort of equality? You know, maybe it's necessary. I'm not even suggesting that it's all bad, but it's a real thing, and I think it affects our self-confidence, and as a result, we're not in our best position, um, or to give our best if we feel like we're at a disadvantage just because.
well, a lot of the guys I talk to, confidence is part of the problem, right? A lack thereof, or overt just cockiness. It's one or the other. Like very
Hmm.
few people are in that
Interesting.
sweet spot in the middle of being confident without being cocky. But that's directly related to two things, and I deal with this all the time. One is most people don't know what they want to do. They want to do something else, but they haven't done the rigorous work of really challenging themselves as to what that is. And sometimes it like I had a discussion with one guy. He was an economist and a data guy, and he was doing boring work for a finance company in Texas, and he was originally from New York. Then we got digging a little deeper, and I find out he's a big fan of basketball. He's a big, tall guy that played basketball in high school, and and I said, you know, have you ever seen Moneyball? And he said, of course. And I said, well, I think the New York Knicks could use your help. And I don't know if that position exists, but if it does, you could go compete for it because you're highly qualified. And that's down passion lane for you, right? And
What was
getting
the characteristics? What did you see in him that he did not see in himself that made you bring that up? What were those characteristics or qualities that you saw in him?
Well, he's a very bright guy, very affable guy, and he was bored. He wanted to go back to New York, and he wanted to get out of the just finance and data space just for the crunching of numbers. He was just bored, and he was being paid handsomely relative to the market. So it's kind of like a golden parachute kind of thing, you know. I don't want to leave this money behind, but I don't want to keep doing what I'm doing. And what I did, Jim, is I just got him thinking in the cliche sense outside the box. You know, you don't have to keep going in the same direction. You can pivot left or you can pivot right. I mean, frankly, I'm not hireable right now for all intents and purposes. I'm too old for the marketplace, and I'm probably perceived as set in my ways because I've been an entrepreneur for so long. I literally am not hireable. So I can empathize with the stance that you're talking about, you know?
Yeah, well, I think none of us would be hireable if we were truly honest with our potential employer. But let's talk about bored. I would fall in that category, and I'll share a story. But before that, boredom is probably the number one problem, because you've seen that movie so many times, middle, beginning, and end, and it's hard to get excited about an end or a story or what you're doing if you've done it so many times. I know that was in my case. Um, geez, 25 years as a manufacturer's rep agency. I've seen everything 10 times and more. And that I started to actually do things for companies that I wasn't hired to do, particularly when it comes to innovation. My job was sales. I was a rainmaker to bring them sales, and was very good at it. We could generate millions of dollars worth of sales. And then as I started getting bored, unknowingly, I wasn't so aware of this. My innovation side started kicking in, and I started to try to become their unofficial innovation officer. And that doesn't go well in a sales role, right? Although sometimes that creativity can help as far as getting sales. But I was changing roles because I was bored. I was bored out of my mind, and I had achieved a lot of the success, or I got the trophy at the end of the year, but I started to become bored. And then for the first time in my life ever, I actually got fired. And part of it was just a bullshit situation. I still believe that, but politics. But the other part was I wasn't as good as I used to be because I was bored out of my mind, and I was trying to create excitement by innovating and things. And sometimes there's not a role for that, right? So
Yeah, no, and I think the other thing that comes from this boredom, well, you get locked in this box, right? Because by the time you get bored, if you were good at what you were doing, you're probably making a lot of money. So
yeah,
how do you replicate that money
yeah,
doing something else that you don't have the same leverageable skills or experience for, even if you have the potential and ability to do it? And then that leads me to the next challenge that all these guys struggle with is, what do you do? Who are you?
hmm,
And it's like, you and I talk about that with regard to our identity ourselves and our bios and our characteristics and stuff. But most people, really, really smart people too, most people, when you say, what do you do? They ramble for a while, and then you end up saying, I still don't really understand what you do,
that is interesting.
So if you go into the marketplace without that like tight, you might as well not even bother. And so I spend a lot of time on the tagline, that 3 or 4 word thing that you can just blurt out, inventor, innovator for you, that kind of stuff, entrepreneur. And then there's the elevator pitch where you have 30, 60, 90 seconds and you can maybe say a couple of paragraphs. And then you have the full story, which is the story you'd tell perhaps in an interview or on the stage, where you have, an hour or so to really kind of lay out the details. But most people never practice that. They don't think about that, especially if they're confident in their own ability. It's kind of like, stepping on the stage without rehearsing,
Yeah. Okay. So let's just go down that road with what, like that. You're right. If you grow up in a particular place at a particular time, uh, what is your title? Oh, he is a doctor. He's a lawyer. And it's not what you want to be. Sometimes it's what you don't want to be. So in my case, I was a cabinet maker out of high school, and not necessarily by choice, but by survival. I had to support myself. Wasn't a great student, but I did that for 5 years, and it provided me, good money, and I bought my first house, and it worked out okay. But there was a point where I didn't want to be a cabinet maker. I didn't want to be a guy that works with his hands. At that time, there was a stigma to that, and plus, it was harder to get girls when you didn't, when the guys that they dressed up, all day long. They were getting all the girls, so it's always a girl factor, of course, right at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think the what is the title, and what you want to become, and then updating that to today. So when you're out of high school or you're out of college, there's the vogue what titles, and those are being redefined as we see them now. So what are your thoughts on some of the titles in relationship to what do you do, and that conversation you're having with yourself versus the conversation maybe you had 20, 30 years ago and didn't even take the time to even update your own title?
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of things that have changed in the whole hiring life cycle, if you will. I mean, I used to have a lot of people say things like, I'd ask them what their title was, and somebody would say vice president, and I'm like, that without context, that doesn't mean anything to me, right? I'm a director. I'm director level. I'm really. Yeah, what what the hell does that mean? And so it's
Yeah.
not just it's embedded in them that they like presuppose that people understand that. Well, that used to be the case more so than it is now. And all the other innovation that's going on is like you don't even need a college degree anymore to get 90% of the jobs out there. And unless you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer, unless you need the degree to legally practice, I mean, the top 15 Fortune 500 companies dropped that requirement, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And most people don't even pay attention to that.
Yeah.
If I had teenage kids right now, I would discourage them from going to college, at least immediately. I'd tell them to get a backpack and a few $100 and travel around the world and come back in a few months or maybe never, and that life experience is, I think more and more companies are valuing these intangible skills now. Again, with the exception of very specific, like computer science, you got to know how to program. But some of the best programmers I know didn't even go to college. Some didn't
Yeah.
graduate from high school. So, what is perceived or required to be hired now? The most important thing is your story, and most people spend no time on their story. So, and without the story, you're just a piece of paper
Yeah.
with some acronyms and some buzzwords. It says nothing about your character, your work ethic, or anything like that. So again, when I talk to people about careers, I move them away from the traditional get your resume together, submit it to
Mhm.
200 online portals, never hear back from anybody, pull your hair out, make no progress, get discouraged, and fall into depression.
Yeah.
It's like my angle is, yeah, you need a resume, but let's talk about your LinkedIn profile and let's talk about your story. And let's, before we do anything, let's figure out if you had your druthers and you could find the intersection between what you're passionate about, what you're good enough at that you could teach other people, and that you can monetize. And that intersection is the gold, right?
Mhm.
And most people spend no time even not even aware that intersection is out there, and certainly not willing to take the risk of pursuing such a bold endeavor. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
back everybody up because they want to go to step 5 and I go bring them back to step 1.
Yeah. Great stuff. I went through this exercise just recently, just right, just and words become um, important. So, what are some of the words not to use? Overused terms. That's what I was going back to your point about generic descriptions or terms or even titles. They can actually be dangerously uh, affecting your ability to tell your new story because you're living an old story. So, what are some of the terms, or let's say, what terms, descriptions that you would recommend them staying away from?
Yeah, well, the first thing that pops into my head in the software business is guru. Everybody
Mm,
likes to throw around the word guru. Again, I'm not being facetious. I chuckle at that, and I just, it's like we were talking about in another episode, Jim, about words like feminism and radicalism and prejudice
mm,
and racism, and you really have to, really define with whomever you're talking. Are we talking about the same definition here? Are we talking about the same word? Because words, to your point, have different meanings, right?
mm.
So there aren't a whole lot of specific words other than guru that I would say shy away from. I tell people, again, all this stuff in hindsight is obvious. You want, especially if you are in a situation where you're a little bit desperate because you got laid off and you haven't had any success interviewing, that desperation cannot be brought into the room. It can't be brought into the resume or the conversation on the phone or in person. And the other kind of flavor to that is blame, right? Everything needs to be focused around the idea that I'm in control of my outcomes and I'm in control of my performance and I'm in control of my responsibilities and my integrity. And yeah, there's circumstances dancing around some of these reasons I left my other jobs, but it's never somebody else's fault, right? You're always taking personal responsibility for everything that's happened to you, and you're learning from the failures, so to speak. And again, you got to kind of coach people on how to put that in context because most people don't even think about it. It's very easy to, you know, the old joke way back in the day was, why'd you leave your last job? My boss was an asshole. Why'd you leave the job before that? My boss was an asshole. How about the one before that? My boss was an asshole. Well, you're the asshole.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But here's one that often this is that word that nobody wants to use, but everybody is doing, and that's sales.
Mhm.
Business is sales. Yet nobody wants to be known as a sales person or a salesman or a saleswoman. Yet everybody is always selling something. And that's, I find it, that's what I did for 25 years, right? My job was to go get sales. And that's the most important thing of any business, is to sell something. Yet if you say I'm a salesman, that comes with some labels and some, it can put you in a bad place. So how do you share? So there's a lot of this is just playing with words, right?
Mhm.
Instead of say, I'm a salesman, I'm a revenue generator. So it's the same shit. We're just repackaging it and relabeling it. And I think that's the opportunity. And those are also the traps. If, to your point, if you're using terms that are outdated or overused, it doesn't mean that your experience goes away. What it means is you just need to update it. And when I did mine just again over this weekend, uh, I did what everybody should do probably, and that's just start Googling these terms and see what they mean in modern terms.
Yeah, well, it's words are a lot. I've had a lot of people say to me over the years, you just have a way of saying things, Mark. And I think that's just a lot of practice. It's a bit of a middle child thing, because I was kind of mediating behavior above me and below me age-wise growing up, how I was raised. But yeah, the way that you say things, particularly in an interview or a negotiation, is just as important as what you're saying. And
Mhm.
you got to give people an out. You can't put people in a corner or on the defensive, and you have to be an attentive listener, an active listener, and these are all like interview cues. These have been part of my life for 30 years. So the thing that I'd like to kind of transition is this concept of, why are you doing what you're doing, right? Why? And most people that I talk to, middle-aged men in particular, like, I don't know. I've been asking myself that now for 5 years. But the salary goes up, the bonus goes up, the mortgage is there. Now I got college tuition, and now I got all these other. I got a boat, and I got a couple cars, and I got some credit cards. Well, you just put yourself in a big box, and you can't get out of that, and it's scary. I know
Yeah.
lots of people that are in that box right now, and it's scary. You
Yeah.
know.
Mark, what do you think of personality test? I know here in Silicon Valley, some companies require a personality test in advance before they'll even review a resume. And personality tests that I did a Colby. I like that one the best. There's a number of them. What was the other one? It's the one the NFL was using. And they find out later they're pretty bad. They can be really bad. But what are your thoughts about personality tests? If not to share with your potential employer, if just to share with yourself to understand who you are and your characteristics and how you're wired. Because I do think that we are born a certain way. That's just who we are. And then years and years of conditioning, whatever that is, we could become something else. But what are your thoughts about personality testing? If you could uh, describe, just so we're talking about the same thing, what does a personality test mean to you versus my definition of it?
I have a bias towards personality tests. I don't think that they're not completely effective all the time. I would consider using a personality test um, to understand more about the person that I was about to talk to, but I don't know that I would recommend using them to just completely discount talking to somebody. I think you're going to miss a lot of gems there. I think of Tom Brady and getting picked up in the 199th pick, or and nobody else wanted him, and you look at his combine, and he looks like a small, skinny high school kid that can't throw, can't run, can't jump, and if that's the personality test for the NFL, then they fail miserably, and we all know how many opportunities they miss. If Tom Brady went to another system, he might have been a very different guy too. So certain people fit into certain companies and cultures, and not other companies and cultures that might be direct competitors. So it's a little tricky using the
Yeah, but I think
personality test.
you interview for the role, and the personality test. Again, it's not something you have to share with the potential employer, but sometimes just to take it to understand yourself, and maybe take two or three. They're not that expensive, just to see how you're registering in a database. It doesn't mean again, that it is something that you're going to redefine your new personality or job description with. But I took a couple of them, and again, part of my takeaway was, hey, I was much more creative than I was acting, and the creative side doesn't go away. If you know anything about, you heard the term, the creativity is a curse, not a gift.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were coming at it from finding out more about yourself as an individual. I was coming at it from companies
Yes.
using them to screen. So my bad. But yeah, as far as taking them to give insight into who you are, this is the whole. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I wouldn't do too many because it'd probably get confusing and costly and stuff. One or two would probably be fine. But yeah, that's going to give you some insight to find out this whole idea of what not should you be doing, but what would be better for you, what would be more directed at your passion or your personality or your strengths. So yeah, flushing that stuff out, that's one of the exercises I go through informally with people. Let's
Yeah.
talk about who you are and why you're doing what you're doing and what maybe other things might be of interest to you.
Yeah.
And
The other thing that we often forget about, these are databases searching for keywords. So when I say words, I should be more specific. In the world we're in now, it's what are your keywords, and how do you use your keywords in describing yourself or whatever you do. And most likely, if you spend a little bit of time of understanding who you are and where you want to go and what you want to do, you're going to come up with 4 or 5 keywords that describes your personality, and you want to use those in how you described yourself and how you're applying for that particular role. And then, like you said, I don't even know what roles mean with companies anymore. I think we're going into a second generation gig economy, and that's kind of cool in its own way, and it's also kind of scary because it doesn't have the securities and the titles that large companies would give us, or give us permission to do something. In many cases, permissions to act like a complete asshole if you're a middle manager, but that's a whole other podcast. So.
well, it also is there's kind of a when component to this as well, because the people that I'm talking to, the middle-aged
Yep.
men, it's like, well, when is it okay for me to move out of my comfort zone, put some of my stuff at risk? And stuff could be your marriage, your home, your kids. I mean,
Mhm.
all these people depending on you. When is it appropriate to put that at risk or take a risk, or is it appropriate? And I think everyone has a different aversion to risk or
Yeah.
attitude about risk. You have to be honest with yourself about that too. When I first started my first company, I left a big job behind, and everybody around me said, well, why are you doing this? You're not going to have this, you're not going to have benefits or 401k or any of this stuff. Well, I was ready, and it worked out really well. And so, but there's a lot of people that probably shouldn't put themselves in that risky position because they're not going to sleep at night, or they're going to get anxious, or they're going to get depressed, or they're going to get scared.
Yep.
It's not a flaw. It's just being honest with who you are. And
Yeah.
that's all part of this process of, wait a second, before we go look for a job, let's fill in some of these blanks. These are really important. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? Who are you? And how do you answer the question, what do you do?
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
work on that. That's the most important part, because then I
Yeah.
can have conversations. Then I'm no longer a resume. I'm a human being.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to continue with the when is it appropriate to talk about your past? Like, when did you do it? And how far do you go back before it looks like this guy's still talking about his high school, you know, fame or whatever? There's a certain point when you go, oh God, this guy is just completely out of date in terms of how he views the world or what he thinks of himself. But yeah, when's important, because are we going back 10 years in your career, 20 years, 30 years? It's still a part of us. And part of it is you're trying to not look too old and maybe not look too young into something. So let's talk about the when you did something and how you want that to be part of your career, next career or new position.
Well, if you think about it in the context of a resume, just visualize a resume. Your current position is where you go into the most detail, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's the most recent experience that you have. and then maybe your previous position. But it's really going to be driven by the interviewer, because it depends on what they ask in terms of, why did you leave that second to last job, or why didn't you finish college, or when I'm interviewing people and contemplating hiring them to work for me, I just want their story. And that's why I think the story is so important. When's going to come out? And if we're presuming that our audience is middle-aged men, so 40 to 65 or so, you're not going back to high school. You might not even talk about college. You probably won't talk about college, except for the fact that you see, I got a degree in this, so there's some foundational knowledge that I have from that education. But
yeah, it's still part of your story, right? If you tell your story, you can maybe describe it in context of the evolution of how you arrived to where you're at today. Mm-hmm. And it's not that you remove it from your story, but you use it as, I think what I'm hearing from you is you use that as a buildup maybe to where you're at today. And if there's a part of your story or your timeline that's relevant, you can mention it there, but you don't, it's not as relevant experience. It's part of your story.
Yeah. I just did this with a client of mine the other day who happened to be a former employee. Then we got to reconnect, and he's a perfect example, just early 40s. And I know him pretty well, but he came to me not because he needed my help. He came to me because he knew that I was going to make this whole journey of him transitioning from a job that wanted him to relocate, and he didn't want to relocate his family, to looking for work, which he hadn't done in 15 years. And we just talked strategy, and we talked about story, and we talked about LinkedIn, and we talked about, this whole idea of this is an opportunity for you now to reconsider what you do. Mm-hmm. And you have the skills to help any company that's growing or looking to scale or be acquired, any of the above, tighten up their data so that they can either lower their costs or increase their revenue and get ready for whatever event is coming. You can do that better than anybody. So you're a valuable asset to just about any organization that has the intention of growing. And that's a great story. Let's figure out how to tell that story,
Yeah. Speaking of a story, I'm going to share one with you, and then we'll move on to the next one. But a very, very good friend of mine, he's an attorney, and we had dinner last week, and he shared with me that he has taken I wouldn't call it a sabbatical, but after 30 plus years of practicing law, he felt that his cognitive abilities were affected, and he's a trial attorney. So obviously it's a role where you need to be on, but he just felt that he couldn't serve his clients like he once did. And he took a test, speaking of old tests, and they told him that he was on a cognitive decline in his memory abilities, right? Which is something, as you know, I can go into detail about as well. But then I just happened to, and my wife was also kind of sharing the same thing. I'm just not the same. I'm not as, I can't remember things like I used to. And where my take on it in the end, and it was a great quote. I'll find it, come back to you. But what it was describing in this podcast was that we go through different stages in our life, and as we get older, our short-term memory is different, obviously, than when we were younger. But it doesn't mean that information isn't extremely valuable. And what I think we often have a chance we do to ourselves, we start going back to the confidence, is effective because we're comparing ourselves to our old self and not really valuing the wisdom, the knowledge, the big picture of these scenarios, and then putting ourselves in a position to just do that. And that's just part of the aging process. That's universe, God, whatever you want to consider it. That's we fill up. Our brains become full of a lot of different things, and it doesn't have the same processing for maybe the short-term memories. And that's where you need younger people to come in that are excited and not bored to fill those roles. But not at all does it mean that you're, particularly in a trial case, because it's big picture, it's strategy. So I think that's another thing that we often discount ourselves, saying, oh, well, I'm not as good as I used to be. Well, you're not supposed to be that kind of good. You're supposed to be a different kind of good, which gets into wisdom and big picture strategy and knowledge. So what are your thoughts about just the way the mind ages and how that affects our ability to perform in different career positions and roles?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, just the physical component of that it's kind of it's nature. It's what happens.
Sure.
It's what happens as we age. But to your point, I think the wisdom that comes from experience is it's a new kind of knowledge. It's a new thing to bring to the table. I've been down this road before, and I know what happens when you go left, and I know what happens when you go right. And I'm telling you to go left, so that you don't have to make the mistake I did. Things like that. And I don't think young people pay attention or appreciate the wisdom of older people like we used to when we were young. I remember when people would come over, adults would come over, really interesting people. I would quite often find myself, sitting on the edge of the couch, just listening to the conversation, saying, wow, this is fascinating. And now kids are upstairs, playing games and on their phones and social media. And that wisdom is just kind of floating in the wind. But not to get off on a tangent, but I think we were talking about careers. I can't not say this, and that is getting a resume together and submitting it to a bunch of places is not the way to get a job. And the way to get a job is to tighten up your shit, AKA your story, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Have a specific path. Like, what do you want to do? I want to do this. This is what I want to do. And this is why I can do it. And this is why you should hire me. And then you start reaching out to people when your shit's all tight, your LinkedIn profile and your story. And then you start asking for the help of people that are closest to you. And then you circle farther and farther out as you make those contacts. You're not sending human resources paperwork and hoping to hear back. That never used to work, but it used to be done all the time. So I tell people,
That's great advice, Mark. Yeah. And
people that I coach, I tell them, if you're using your resume to get a job, you're pursuing a very frustrating, ineffective path. And so that 6 degrees of separation, that Kevin Bacon game, it's like everybody knows somebody that could potentially help you. And if they don't know somebody, that other person then knows somebody. So, but you can't send people on a journey to help you if they don't have a specific understanding of what they're helping you with, AKA what you want to do. So it all ties back to that. So I shift flip the whole hiring thing upside down and say, this is a networking party. This is hey, I need some help. This is what I want your help with. And this is the kind of thing I'm looking for. And then you do something for them in return. You lead with, how can I help you as well? Let's collaborate. Where's the reciprocal opportunity here for us to help each other? And that's
yeah,
that's a mindset. And I just wanted to get that out because we're talking about careers.
yeah, yeah. And if I was to add to that, uh, often this goes back to your point about confidence. Confidence is everything. Life is confidence, right? It's managing your confidence so it doesn't go too high, doesn't go too low. Um, but the confidence often is affected when you're comparing yourself maybe to a younger generation of possible colleagues or other people applying for that job. But I heard a great quote the other day. I'm going to continue to use it, but it was comparison is the thief of joy.
Yep.
So and it's a great quote because it really is, it's saying if you compare yourself to everybody else or to somebody else, particularly in a job situation, and you believe that because they're younger, they have more going for them, then you're going to, that's the thief of your joy. And your joy is what people are really going to hire. Who what does he bring to the company, the culture? What energy is he bringing? If he's confident and he is clear on what he provides to the company, to your point, that's a good story. Yeah, we'll find a place for you. But often the comparison of somebody else is what affects the confidence. It's just a normal thing we do.
It's interesting. I've heard that quote more frequently. I heard it. One of the Van Gundys was saying it on some sports cast. And then I had another colleague of mine who just wrote a book was using it. So I'd love to figure out the origin of that, but it's absolutely true. I mean, we all get this, and this is a lot of what I do in helping, men transition in their careers for whatever reason is, is we all think that we're alone in our hardship, or we're alone in our circumstance, or we're alone in our experience. We're not. This story is really common, if and that's why I was struggling for a long time in my career coaching business with, who's your audience. You and I have talked about this a couple of times. Like, I can help everybody. Well, if you know anything about sales, that is not the way to go into the marketplace. You can't help everybody. But everybody's in career transition. I mean, when I was beginning as a recruiter in Boston, I remember, the question that you ask when someone picks up the phone in the software engineering group back when they had phones, and not cell phones, was, if I had something that was more interesting or more challenging or more rewarding than what you're doing now, would you be interested in hearing any details about that? Who's going to say no to that?
Yeah.
You know?
Here's something I do know what they say no to, and that is what is referred to as the douchey, um, old, what do you guy, right? And that's because they are using some very outdated sales techniques, like sell, never
Always be
stop
closing.
selling,
Yeah.
always be closing. I mean, that's some bad shit right there. And I've worked with some probably the worst sales managers ever to walk the earth, that used to put us in a room and yell at us and do all that stuff. And I just look back and still just shake my head and go, that guy's a jackass. So there are certain things though you really want to remove yourself from, and that is that old style. Let's close them. Let's put them in a room and let's close them. And it's bad stuff. I don't think it was ever that effective, but it was the trend at the time. But yeah, what are some ways of, and this is going to go into our the when, the time when we did something and had some success, and how it's different as far as just the words we use and how we describe it. And then what industry, and how does that transfer over to either new industries or new uh, positions that maybe in the past you weren't interested or qualified for.
Well, I think so I'll answer two questions. One is, can you move from one industry to the next? And, that in my experience, because it's a big thing in software, I need a guy with financial experience. I need a guy with healthcare experience or whatever. Um, the employers are all different about that. If some are, no, a problem solver is a problem solver, right? Work ethic is work ethic. Intellect is intellect, right? I want someone from a different industry because they won't have a jaded opinion of how my industry should work. So it really is a philosophical thing, and you have to find companies that are open to that conversation. I find companies that will take people from other industries are more creative. There's more opportunity for growth and input and impact because they have that openness of mind about that. So it depends on how you look at that. And the answer is yes, you can. And I think you seek out these companies that have cultures that promote this kind of creativity and opposing views or different perspectives, if that makes sense.
Well, it does. And there's been times when I was thinking about hiring somebody and I would look at their resume and I'd say, well, they're almost overqualified. Or maybe to your point earlier, if they've been in a particular space for so many years, you're never going to change the way they see it. And at least in my case, if it's any kind of innovation or you're trying to create a new product or a new approach, you don't want the default of what they know and how it is now. In fact, it's the zig and the zag. You want kind of the opposite. So I think there is such thing as overqualified and too much experience in a particular industry. You think that looks good. You think that that's going to enhance your opportunities to get a particular position, but it could be actually hurting you. So I appreciate your insight though on not being afraid to pivot to a different industry or domain.
So you're talking about douchey salespeople. That's what
Yes,
you're talking
yes,
about.
that's a real part, and this is what referred to boomer, white, old douchebag.
Well, it's the car salesman. It's the car salesman. It's like I told you, I think the experience I had with my daughter just a couple weeks ago now, and the first guy that greeted us, and we knew what we wanted, right? And we knew the price we were willing to pay and how much we were willing to put down. We had all the numbers. We'd done our homework. And the first guy, I ask everybody that's trying to sell me stuff, how do you get paid? Right? Because that's how they get motivated, is how they get paid. Are you on commission? The guy says no. The second guy he hands us off to, I said, how do you get paid? And he goes, we get, X number of dollars per deal. I said, so you get commission? He goes, yeah. I go, the other guy told me you guys don't get commission. So that you could call that, you could say that's not commission, but it effectively is commission, right? Mm-hmm. If you make the transaction, you get money. If you don't get money, right? That's commission. And then we had a third guy. When the second guy got up and he wasn't listening, he was like, I don't want to put any money down and I can afford X number of dollars per month in a payment. And the guy came back with 3 options that were twice as high with money down. And I'm like, you're either not listening to me or you're an idiot, right? And probably both. And he gets up and says, let me go talk to my finance guy. And I looked at my daughter and I said, he brings another guy back, we're leaving, right? He comes around the corner with the other guy. And I'm like, nope. I say to the guy, do you have my figures for me? Yeah. You go, I don't have time to sit down. I told you guys we had an appointment we had to get to. And I told you I didn't want to talk to anyone else. Do you have the figures? And the guy that came, he looks at me, he goes, nope. And he turns around and walks away.
Yeah, it's a great story. And this is part of a style. It's a style that company still buys into, that particular dealership. And it's worked for them for many years, and they're going to keep doing it until they're out of business. And I believe, eventually will be out of business. I think I shared with you, I purchased a Tesla, was it last year, the year before? And what a difference as far as a user experience.
Oh yeah.
And I've been so impressed with that, and dreaded even buying a car the traditional way. One of the reasons I was interested in the Tesla, they do a great job of what all good salespeople do, and that's qualify you because you did it online. They educate you. Selling is telling, right? And they do a good job of telling the story about the product, giving you the answers. And then by the time you get there, the transaction's already over. You're just going to do the test drive and say yes.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think that's a great example of now dating. And when we talk about, I'll just refer to as the Ducey sales guy. That's a management style that some people still follow, or it is a company organization structure of hierarchy and titles that manage from the top. I believe that the opportunities going forward is a bottom up management style, not a top down. And that is a difference between, say, getting the job in the 80s, 90s, 2000 compared to today. And then one other comment or question I have for you, and that is women in these hiring roles too. You're interviewing with a woman that's different too, and you're a man. So that there's just some questions for you of how that's different.
Well, I think it's different. Like any human being is different from another human being. Mm-hmm. You have to kind of size up the person that you're talking to or dealing with as quickly as possible and make adjustments accordingly, because I think it's less about gender and it's more about personality, right? And certainly men and women, generally speaking, have different personalities, and women are more nurturing than men more often than not, more emotional more often than not. So these you got to be careful with stereotypes, because everybody's different as an individual. But no, I think that selling, to close that topic out, I've always considered it educating. It's active listening and educating and making sure that you're talking to people in the right audience, people who are already predisposed to be interested in what you're selling, and you're educating them as to why your shit is better than everyone else's shit. And it's not bragging. It's just, it's like, and it's not really even about benefits. It's not really about the function of your service or how your service works or how your product works or any of that functionality stuff. It's like, what's this going to do for me, right? Like buying a Tesla it's not really even about buying a car. It's buying an experience. You just said it, right? It's also an image, and then it has something to do with the efficiency of the car, the comfort of the car. Certainly those are very big, but it's like Apple, it's like Apple has no salespeople, 0 salespeople. I don't know if that's still true, but I heard that a few years ago. When you walk into an Apple store, nobody needs to sell you anything. You already know what you want. They
Mhm.
just need to tell you what colors they have, and maybe dimensions, maybe size, but you already know what you want. You're coming for a phone, or you're coming from a gadget, you're coming for a screen. You know what you want. And that's just an exceptional example of, if you're marketing properly, you don't have to do any selling. But anyway, the everybody should learn how to sell, aka listen and educate. And because if you can do that, if you can bring that skill to the table in another job, then you're that much more attractive. It's just
Yeah.
like being articulate or speaking in public or any of these ancillary skills that you can bring on top of your domain expertise. That's the kind of person that people like to hire,
Yeah.
multifaceted.
Yeah. Yeah. No question. And sales is persuasion. Persuasion is something everybody is doing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we just have to, again, be aware of when you're selling something. And here's another thing that I've really believe, which some people just don't have it in them, and that is a win-win situation. I believe there actually is a win-win. Some people are just hardwired to believe there is no such thing as a win-win. There has to be a loser in order to be a winner. And I hope to change that, to reach that starts to reshape too. In some cases, don't get me wrong, in a game situation, you're going to have a winner and loser based on X amount of time and point system. But in sales and in business, you can go into it as a win-win. And then I do think people pick up on that, and that's the trust, right? We don't, there's nothing about sales is confused people don't buy, and we buy from who we trust, know, and like. That will always be.
I think for anybody listening that's contemplating a career change, or frustrated or bored, or need to make a change, there's a lot of really simple work that you can do to polish up your shit before you go out into the marketplace. But it's not the way that you think it is. It's not the resume in high volume. It's a polishing up your story, which will give you confidence, and then taking that story to people that are in your circles of, level 1, level 2, level 3. First is family, friends, colleagues, so on and so forth. And unlike a place like LinkedIn, you start joining groups and you talk to people with common interests. You might be talking to
Yeah.
people that like motorcycles or rugby, other
Yeah.
rugby players or whatever. You just
Yeah.
that's the way. You might not even need a resume if you do what I
Yeah.
propose. Part of this getting your story straight and really being honest with yourself about who you are, to your point, Jim, is we have this affiliation with this Inspired Performance Institute that's founded by Dr. Don Wood, who we have mentioned and will mention again, because it's an integral part of this kind of rebuilding yourself exercise. And a lot of what we all face is we're limiting ourselves by a certain set of beliefs, right? And some of these beliefs are conscious, but some of them are unconscious, and we attribute those to traumatic events in our past that could be very simple things like I got yelled at a lot in school, to I was sexually abused by a relative. Really distinctly different levels of trauma, but they have an impact, and they get into your subconscious. And if you don't do anything about them, then they're going to be limiting you in some capacity. The way you think about money, fear of success, fear of failure, the list goes on and on. And most people I talk to that are in career transition are dealing with a level of anxiety and a level of fear and a lack of confidence that can all be attributed back, at least in part, to some traumatic experience that's stuck in your subconscious. And what Dr. Wood does in his program is he goes at this subconscious and rewires the brain in a really simple fashion. And Jim, you went through the program. It's no sense in getting into the science or complicating it. If that's something that you're interested in finding more about, because before you go out into the world and make this transitional attempt, you get that subconscious right, and you get out of your own way. If that's something you're interested in, there'll be a link in the show notes. And I'm the one who takes those calls when you have questions. So if you begin that journey and you like what you see, you're going to end up talking to me anyway, and I'll answer whatever questions I can, and then you can make a decision about whether that's something you want to invest your money and time in. But uh, it's a great way to kind of get fit mentally before you take on this major transition, if you will.
Yeah, Mark, if I could share my experience with that, because that when I went through the program, uh, that was one of the things that really helped a lot. And that was, as you mentioned before, it wasn't just finding the past traumas of childhood or even something that Dr. Wood mentions. There's such a thing as business trauma, that it's a real thing, just as a childhood trauma or other things that happen in your life that affect you, and you project that out, or you're protecting yourself from that unknowingly. Uh, but what he does, I thought a very effective job of doing is not just focusing on what was wrong, but also what did you do in your past that produced the results that you want to produce now. And so he helps you kind of just clear the past, but also is retraining your neural brain waves. I think that's the right term. I don't know technically, how to describe it, but you're retraining the way you think to reproduce the results that you want based on past successes. Uh, and the idea is to identify the past failures and make sure that you're not spending all your energy and on avoiding those, because that's what the brain does when it feels like there's fear. It just protects itself. So this goes back to me what you were saying about your story being in your confidence. Uh, Often, in order to open up those new opportunities, you have to flush out the past, and there is a way to do that. Um, it's almost impossible, I believe, to do it on your own. I mean, there's certain things you can do as far as talking to yourself and hyping yourself up and this and that, but these are the kind of things uh, that really have advanced in just recent years. And I think Dr. Wood has done a great job. It sure has helped me at this stage and this point in my life.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's noticeable the way you look, the way you sound, your energy level. I've noticed it since we started talking. So, and again, it's a
Well, I appreciate you saying that.
yeah, we make apparently we make 90% of our decisions on a subconscious level. So if your
Mhm.
subconscious is doing stuff and you're not even aware of it, you don't even know what's in your way, you could literally go the rest of your life making bad decisions based on something that you could do something about. And so the stories of people that come to the program and then come out the other side are astounding. And there's testimonials on the website, and watch and listen to other people talk about their journeys. And I think from a career perspective, if I were going to be engaging in a major career transition or decision, yeah, I'd want to get my mind straight first. And this is one way to do that. The other way, to your point, is a coach and a mentor, somebody with an objective, intelligent outside perspective that can bring things to your attention that you wouldn't otherwise be aware of. Those are
Mark,
those are
and
those are two huge pieces.
they are. And if I could add to that, and often the people closest to you are the worst people to get that kind of advice, and not because they don't care about you, not because they don't have your best intentions or best intentions for you, but because they see you as you are, not who you want to be, but as you are. And that's that. I think your point was a professional or third party person to help you work through that. Whether it's reading a book, I know Dr. Wood has a couple of books. What are the name of the books that he goes deep into that?
Yeah, the first one was "You Must Be Out of Your Mind," and the second one is "Emotional Concussions," and they're both on
Emotion,
Amazon.
yeah, emotional concussions. It's a great title because he does a deep dive into how the brain works and really backs it up with data, not just an opinion. So yeah, I'm glad we got that in, Mark. But I think
Yeah, I think they're, if you're contemplating a career change, then your story is part of it, your subconscious is part of it, your attitude. These are all foundational, necessary pieces, and most people that seek to change things from a career standpoint don't do any of this homework before they go out there and just start talking. sending stuff and talking, and it's inefficient. It's
Yeah.
not the way to go about looking for work. So, Jim, I think it's a good time to conclude this discussion for episode 3. In episode 4, we're going to talk about identity, and we look forward to seeing everybody in episode 4.
Yeah, Mark, couldn't agree more. Looking forward to episode 4 myself.